This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 607, entitled The Masculist Counterattack Against the Monoconscious Biasing of Society by the Feminists. Description. This flyer shows how masculists can counterattack the monoconscious bias that exists in society due to the preaching of the feminists that gender oppression is a one-way street. The first major task of the masculists is to increase the number of their kind to the millions, and then to counterattack the monoconscious feminists with masculist arguments, teaching the feminists and society that women oppress men worse, with women's horrible and decades-lasting gender crimes against men. When there are millions of masculisted men, society and the feminists will become biconscious, and society will be a lot happier as a result. Now the flyer itself. The Masculist Counterattack Against the Monoconscious Biasing of Society by the Feminists, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. If you mention the term gender politics to just about anyone, certainly to feminists, then they will automatically, unconsciously associate the term with feminism, since the only gender political discourse that they have ever heard in their whole lives has been feminist. So naturally it does not occur to them that there might be a second form of gender politics, that is, that covers the issues of men, a male gender politics, that is, masculism, men's lib. This is because for the huge majority of people, masculism is new to them, unknown to them. So after a lifetime of conditioning, that is brainwashing, that gender oppression is a one-way street, which is what feminism preaches to women and to society, and for the past 6 decades of gender political monopoly by the feminists, it's not surprising that to masculists, it feels as though there is a deeply held bias in society that is feminist-based, that is a deeply monoconscious bias in society that is feminist-generated. Masculists are really pissed off with this situation and are out to change it, largely by teaching society that feminism is only half of the gender political story, and that the other half is masculist, which shows that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that in fact women oppress men worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men are horrible and last decades, making them a lot more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. The usual big 3 ways that masculists trot out to back up their claim that women oppress men worse are: 1. Women's manslavery, which is far and away the worst of all gender crimes in either direction, in brackets, men against women or women against men, and a war issue to masculists. 2. Women's divorce rape that ruins the lives of 1 father in 4. 3. Women's forced fatherhood that forces millions of men to pay for a kid that he doesn't want in the first place. Monoconsciousness is a masculist term that means that one has only had one gender political consciousness raised, that is, nearly always one's feminist consciousness, since for 99.9+% of people at the time of writing, that is the only gender political consciousness raising that they have ever heard of. To masculists, when they hear some monoconscious feminists sounding off against men for the ways that men oppress women, in brackets, which, by the way, biconscious masculists do not deny, since they too can read feminist books as readily as can feminists, close brackets, they feel antsy, frustrated at the monoconscious bigotry and hypocrisy of these MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots. Masculists are usually biconscious, they have had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised. That is, they are very aware how women oppress men as vice versa, and are angry and hateful at those gender criminal women who commit horrible decades-lasting gender crimes against men, e.g. the big 3 mentioned above: manslavery, divorce rape, forced fathering, etc. A monoconscious feminist sounds like a hypocritical bigot to a biconscious masculist who is well informed how women oppress men, so is motivated to teach that monoconscious feminist about masculist ideas so that she becomes biconscious too. Just how to do this is the main topic of this flyer. So how can biconscious masculists counterattack the monoconscious biasing of society by the feminists? Obviously via education, teaching feminists and society that gender oppression is very much a two-way street and that in fact women oppress men worse than vice versa. It's my personal experience that trying to teach a monoconscious feminist who has been taught, in capital letters, all her life by feminism, that gender oppression is a one-way street, that men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed, is a difficult psychological task that usually generates cognitive dissonance in the minds of monoconscious feminists. If you're a monoconscious feminist and you've been taught by dozens of feminist books that you have read that gender oppression is a one-way street, then when you hear your first masculist telling you that women oppress men worse, then you are not going to believe it. To do so would undermine all that you have been taught by the feminists all your life. It would be like going up to a priest and saying, quote, "Mr. Priest, there's no God. Religions are human fictions. You have wasted your whole life believing in a humanly concocted fiction." End quote. Of course, the priest in 99% of cases would reject such a statement. Otherwise, he may well have an existential crisis that might drive him to suicide, since his core belief system will have been deconstructed before his eyes, which is deeply psychologically threatening to him. The whole point of his being is at stake. A similar story occurs with monoconscious feminists when they are confronted by masculists, that is, angry, hateful, biconscious masculists, who are angry at the monoconscious bias of feminists and their hypocritical bigotry. So what can biconscious masculists do to counter the monoconscious ignorance of monoconscious feminists? Masculists can use the carrot and the stick approaches to persuade monoconscious feminists to convert themselves into becoming biconscious feminists. Masculists can show these monoconscious feminists that it is very much in their self-interest to become biconscious, since that way they will be much happier in life and be more likely to hold on to their boyfriends. 99.5% of women are heterosexual, so even the most rabid of feminazis is still dependent on men for her sex. Most men find monoconscious, misandrist, male-dumping feminazis real cunts and choose not to have relationships with them. So such women tend to rot on the shelf, manless and hence loveless, sexless, babyless and ignored. Biconscious feminists are much nicer to be with for men, since biconscious feminists tend to lose their anger at men once they become biconscious, since they learn that in fact women oppress men worse due to the horror and decades-lasting gender criminality of women who commit the above major gender crimes against men. They have their feminist anger at men cancelled by their female masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. So they become far less feminazi bitchy and hence are a lot more approachable by men, hence are more likely to have boyfriends, hence to be loved, sexed, orgasmed, babied, etc. The above is the masculist carrot approach to women, to monoconscious feminists. The stick approach is much more violent and effective. Masculists tell women, particularly monoconscious feminists, that they had better learn some masculism or they will likely lose their boyfriends, that is, their currently monoconscious male feminist boyfriends. Since masculists target these boyfriends, teaching them masculist ideas so that these boyfriends become biconscious, so that with their new biconsciousness they begin to see the monoconsciousness of their girlfriends as hypocritical, brackets, that is, feminists lashing out at men for the ways that men oppress women, when in fact women oppress men far worse, close brackets, and bigoted, since most monoconscious feminists react quite bigotedly when confronted with masculist ideas. These boyfriends will then become frustrated and disgusted with the monoconscious hypocrisy and bigotry of their feminist girlfriends and will dump them. When millions of monoconscious feminists have been dumped, the collective pain that these women will feel will translate into a much greater motivation to understand what the masculists are saying, so that these monoconscious feminists will convert themselves into biconscious feminists, and hence be much nicer for men to have relationships with. But getting to this stage is still a bit premature for the masculists, for the simple reason that at the time of writing, that's March 2023, there are simply not enough masculists to have a major social, ideological, political impact on millions of monoconscious feminists and society in general. So the first real task for the masculists is to spread masculist ideas amongst men to a far greater extent in the manosphere and the media, which is what I'm trying to do right now in writing this flyer and videoing it, with me reading it out loud and filming it. Once there are millions of masculisted men, they can spread masculist ideas and values to society at large by getting them into the mass media, so that millions of monoconscious feminists are exposed to masculist ideas, so that millions of women and men learn about women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, etc., and learn how horrible these decades-lasting gender crimes are that millions of women commit routinely against men. Thus, the masculists are out to change society by creating a FIP society, that is one in which both sexes, especially young women, are socialised by parents and educated by teachers to be FIPs, that's financially independent persons, as adults, and not expect fluffy style, in brackets, fluffy equals masculist label for a traditional woman, who expect to live off the labour and money of a man for decades, thus manslaving him and divorce raping him for decades. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies and are at war against them, aiming to exterminate them by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, so that their fluffy, man-slaving, divorce-raping genes are removed from the gene pool, that is, effectively exterminated, forced to die a slow, miserable death, since masculists are abolitionists who see manslavery as literally 1,000 times bigger problem than was Negro slavery in the US in the 1800s. Negro slavery was the root cause of the US Civil War. Today's masculists are at war with fluffies and aim to wipe them out, forcing women to fib up or to rot on the shelf, hated and spat at. Close brackets. To masculists, the fipping of women is an essential prerequisite for the creation of a FIP society, so that the divorce courts that butcher the lives of one father in 4 can be fundamentally reformed. Masculists want the establishment of GECs, that's GECs, that's Gender Equality Committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender political issues of both sexes are dealt with equally, which is certainly not the case in today's highly gender politically biased feminist monoconsciousness. When there are millions of biconscious masculists, they'll be able to harangue monoconscious feminists when they come across them, in conversations, in public talks, in the media, etc. As millions of monoconscious feminists are regularly confronted with very angry, hateful masculists who harangue them with statements like, quote, "Learn some masculism, you misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi cunt. Learn that gender oppression is a two-way street and that you women oppress men far worse. We masculists have no patience with your feminazi ignorance and bigotry and will bite your fucking head off if you don't soon become biconscious. You will lose your boyfriend after we teach him masculist ideas so that he will see you as a monoconscious feminazi bigot," that's MFB, "will become disgusted with you and then dump you. We masculists are fed up with your monoconscious bigotry, your hypocritical misandry. So become biconscious or rot on the shelf, you hated feminazi cunt. Go crawl away into some corner and die. If you don't become biconscious, even young women will hate you, since we masculists teach them that their babylessness is indirectly due to your control of the divorce courts that you have made so toxic for men that 2/3 of young men refuse to marry and be fathers, so these young women will hate you for their babylessness. When both sexes hate you, you will convert to biconsciousness, or you will be forced into a slow, miserable death that you will deserve. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 600 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.